Another wonderful guest speaker. Now, Jessie actually wanted to be here in person. Jessie is the CEO of Groundswell, and because of Groundswell, we have Compassionate Communities and Dying to Know Day. But of course, COVID stopped her travelling over to WA, so she's joining us via Zoom today. And Jessie's going to be talking to you about the challenges of establishing a compassionate community and the lessons that they've received from the Groundbreakers initiative. So a little bit about Jessie. Jessie's been with Groundswell since 2012 in various roles and as the CEO since 2019. The Groundswell project works in healthcare, neighbourhoods and workplaces to build compassionate communities that support people through their toughest times of health decline, ageing, dying and grief. It is a social change organisation that encourages people to talk about death and dying and care in their own way. After losing her firstborn son in 2006, Jessie experienced post-traumatic growth thanks to her community. She invites everyone to be a part of the collective change around death and dying in Australia. So welcome Jessie, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Thank you, Samar. Hello everybody from lockdown Sydney. Can you hear me okay? Yay, great. I've got some hands there. I really wish I was there, but I'm not. So I'm going to do my best to share with you over the next 15 minutes from Marrickville, Sydney. First of all, I believe we are, because of this pandemic, we're in a major experiment right now of communal thinking and feeling about what it means to be in community. And during the past 18 months, so many of us have perhaps rediscovered the role that people play in our lives. We've seen wonderful outpourings of creativity, of compassion and love. And gosh, if that communal outpour was consistently delivered to our dying and our grieving, we could transform the experience of death and dying in Australia. So what an incredibly important social movement this is for our communities to care for each other at end of life. This work is about social change, and social change is all about people and their leadership. And it's often said, with the right people, anything is possible. But how do each of us know what to do from where we stand? And how do we know what our role is in this change? And what kind of leaders do we need to be to create the kind of mass culture where people going through a death can genuinely care for each other and be held by the broader community for as long as it takes? To genuinely drive choice in where people want to spend their final days, and to genuinely recognize and appreciate grief in all its forms. We are all here because we want to see change, and we need to play the long game. My aim today is to speak faithfully to just some of the research findings in the operationalizing of 9 compassionate community projects, in the hopes that they may affirm what you have experienced and that they may illuminate the opportunities and the challenges for us all. So I've got 15 minutes to share, so I'm only going to share just a few of the findings, and the full report is available for download on our website. So across the last 8 years working in the end-of-life care space, I've learned that it's deeply complex, deeply human, and therefore highly charged. Many of us bring our personal experiences of death and caring to the change work. And this creates, I guess, the backdrop to the opportunities and challenges of creating that change. So today you might be a retiree who says, I cared for my partner, I know what that's like, I can help others who are starting out. Or I know what grief feels like, and I'm here with you. You might be a community development worker who says, I want to empower the community, I've got the job, so where do I start? You might be a health professional who says, I want to be involved in community groups. Is it okay that I be a voice for them? You might be a public servant who says, look, we've got some funding. What type of program should we invest in? Or what would it take to get these outcomes? The authors of our research say, quote, we believe it's unethical to promote this work without also having a clear understanding of the difficulties people, groups, communities and organisations might encounter. Naming these, saying, yes, they do exist, is not necessarily easy work, but it's important. So 3 years ago at Groundswell, we embarked on a journey to understand the process of how community-led compassionate communities can be established and sustained. So we might start the presentation now. Thanks, Dean. So we designed what we called the Groundbreakers Initiative. So we invited expressions of interest from across the country from people who wanted to start a group and a place-based community project that would connect locals to learn and support each other at end of life. We received 34 applications and we identified 9 to work with over 2 years. We looked for people who had a bias towards action and who had strong roots in the community. 4 of those groups were made up of activated citizens working at the grassroots. 1 was a local health district and 3 groups stemmed from existing not-for-profits. One of those 9 was, of course, the Southwest Compassionate Community Network that are hosting this conference today, and what an incredible achievement this conference is. You are the pioneers that Professor Alan Kelleher just spoke about, as were, of course, the other 8 groundbreaker groups. We partnered with the Caring at End of Life research team led by Professor Debbie Horsfall at Western Sydney University, who conducted in-depth qualitative research which captured critical moments in time over that 2-year period with the groups. We wanted to know what actually happens, what works, and what role we could play as a not-for-profit. The research authors were made up of academics and community development practitioners, and I wish to acknowledge them for their groundbreaking work. They are Professor Debbie Horsfall, Helen Psychogius, Nikki Reed, Dr. Kerry Noonan, and Holly Rankin-Smith. We were able to commission this research thanks to funding support from Bupa Health and Wentworth Healthcare, which is a primary health network in New South Wales. The researchers focused mainly on the people who did the work and on their experience. And most of the groundbreaker groups had a mixture of paid and unpaid roles. So overall, we learned that building compassionate communities using a community development approach is both doable and successful in diverse ways. There is no one answer or one solution. Like community development, the answer lies in the process. The researchers really want us to know that. They want us to know that this work is about the process we take and the process that's supported and championed by decision makers and funders. They identified that this work is incredibly hard, it requires great skill and tenacity, and that is often undervalued and underpaid. The leads of the groundbreaker groups at the beginning of their projects were really excited, but they also felt an incredible weight of responsibility, and everyone felt unprepared. Taking action when feeling unprepared can be scary, and it's not typical in many sectors, but starting before you feel ready is very normal in the social change space, because the moment you start, you get feedback, and then that in turn gives you confidence to know what the next step is to take. The first main finding or theme that the leads was that the leads questioned their own ability and their legitimacy to lead their compassionate communities. This came from health workers and community members, both paid and volunteer. They questioned and sometimes even challenged their own credentials to lead. Now this theme changed over time as confidence grew and identities as leaders developed, but it did take time. Those working in the health role would question their role in representing communities, and those in community in turn would often say about those in the health roles, well, they don't really understand what we're trying to do. So it didn't much matter which role anyone took up. People questioned themselves. And it's fair to say that given the vast majority of participants were women, women questioned themselves. So let's not be surprised when we feel that ourselves in the beginning or when we see it in others. Let's understand this phenomenon so we can embrace and work with it. The second theme was around coming face to face with gatekeepers. Questioning legitimacy was compounded by the various gatekeepers who acted to keep participants in their place. The term gatekeepers is used here to mean those who control access to resources, services, and knowledge. What this sounds like to the compassionate community leader experiencing it is, who are you? How do you fit? Or what you're doing is in competition with us. Even what you're doing isn't really compassionate communities work. Now, there are a myriad of reasons why this gatekeeping occurs, and I dare say it happens in every social movement, in every industry, but the participants were quite clear that this behaviour did not serve their interests or the interests of their communities. One even said, if we're going to take each other down, that's not going to be beneficial to anybody. The authors asked, in whose interests is to exclude people? Who gets to be the gatekeeper? And whatever happened to gratitude? The next theme, compassionate communities as women's work. There were a total of 18 community leads across the Groundbreakers, and only one of those was male. I wonder what the gender balance is in the audience today. Are we seeing a bit of a shift? Not sure. The authors reflected that the gender imbalance is a conundrum. If we don't address it, we risk further exploitation of unpaid labour, the carer, the volunteers, as well as reinscribing the notion that caring and community work is women's business. There is plenty of evidence that men can do it, of course, as shown through the AIDS epidemic. And of course, men are often primary carers or members of caring networks at end of life. We all have a responsibility to consider and address the extent to which this social movement is truly inclusive of all people, with all ranges of abilities and identities and their gifts. And I think Dr. Andrea Gwynrod's work, which you'll hear more about this afternoon, really exemplifies this. There were a number of strategies for success. So firstly, a major strength was that there was an establishment of a unique and special space just for the leads. That space was reflective and it was collegial. Now, Groundswell enabled this by bringing the groups together in the first place. The researchers enabled this by bringing their strengths-based questions, their curiosity, their values, but most importantly, the leads created this by defining the kind of space that they wanted and they needed. There was encouragement, there was knowledge exchange, and there was a sort of critical consciousness raising and solidarity building. Now, this was found to be fundamental to supporting the participants through their work. One of the final themes that I'm going to speak to, it's going to be supported by Bonnie's presentation after me, which is around the tensions of leadership in community development work. The authors noted that the typical available models of leadership, where that leader role is the one person, didn't meet the needs of the participants. There was a concerted effort to move towards collective leadership, moving from the I to the we. Participants struggled to share leadership with those in their communities who appeared to resist taking responsibility or doing the work that needed to be done, but nevertheless, they persisted in helping their communities to share the work and encourage them to be self-reliant. Now, this theme became less apparent over the life of the project as the communities moved into their action phase of their work and as leadership became more a set of actions rather than a role or a position. The focus became more around ways to decentralize decision-making and the ongoing work around initiating, mobilizing, and maintaining networks of relationships. As I mentioned up front, focusing on the process is critical. However, the process mostly involves focusing on relationship building as that first stage in developing capacity in others. And we know that takes time. And that time often goes unrecognized and unacknowledged. The wonderful Peter Kenyon refers to community development work as opening doors and opening windows. There's a lot of engagement work in convincing to do that. So there are often exhaustive and exhausting expectations from others to do this work, and this must be acknowledged and accounted for. Also, the participants sharing leadership with their communities by mobilizing their members to take those lead roles. They were liaisons and advocates for them. They invited them to meetings. They gave them a platform. And that work was just ongoing and it changed over time. Towards the end of the Groundbreakers program, there were agencies in the system that started to ask the groups for their support and their advice. So we ask, should it take unpaid, hard burnout work to get there? No, it should not. So where to from here? Well, one of our projects at Groundswell is we're working with one compassionate community network down in the Illawarra Shoalhaven, New South Wales, and we're supporting them to transition from a grant that funded their lead organiser to a 100% volunteer-run network. Now, they are considering how they will collectively steward their power, and they are creating their own leadership frame. This project, whoa, that's my phone. Hold on. That's my timer. Thank you. Good. And I'm just coming to the end. The project started in community and was championed by health from the very beginning. And because of that, we know it will grow. They are made up of community members with lived experience, ex-palliative care staff, arts practitioners, nurses, nurse educators, a church minister, people from the Multicultural Council, and a fantastic young guy who's connecting the dots between mental health, suicide prevention, and end-of-life caring. Young people have so much to offer this movement. The network runs death cafes, and of course, people who come to the death cafes are experiencing, having a positive experience. But I think the impact really is in the network itself, because when we have well-being, when we're able to contribute to something meaningful. Professor Kelleher said he called for a strong and efficient partnerships across all of civic society. Well, to get that, we must consider how we approach each other in this work. So what kind of collaborator are you? What kind of advocate are you? What kind of leader are you? There are not many things in this world that affect 100% of us. Climate change, a global pandemic, dying and grief. Let's do our best to come from empathy and compassion for ourselves and for each other. And let's lead in a way that truly honours the humanity in all of us. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you today. Happy Dying to Know Day. And please get in touch with us at Groundswell if you'd like to have a chat.
Thanks so much, Jessie. Is Jessie still with us, Dean? Yes? Jessie, can you hear me?
I can, yep.
It's such a shame that you're not here, but I just wanted to acknowledge your wonderful support for our Compassionate Schools project. The displays out in the foyer are absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure you'll be watching the live stream for when they do their presentation after lunch.
Absolutely will. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks, Jessie.